Berkeley County 911.
Ma'am, I have an emergency at 1:30.
What's going on?
I had a friend of mine in my house. He come at me. He was striking me. I had to shoot him.
Okay,
You need to send some ambulance right now. Yes, ma'am.
Where did you shoot him?
I shot him in the chest 2 times.
Okay, is he breathing?
Right now he's breathing.
Okay, first I just want to start by explaining why I'm doing this. Like, I know a little bit of what happened with you. I would say a tiny bit. I want to document all these stories of people defending their own life.
Right.
Because one thing is, we all know there's a chance you could go to prison and stuff like this. And it seems like there's not real information out there on how to keep yourself out of prison.
Right.
So I want to just get real life stories from people that have experienced it, so we can learn more about what really goes on and we can stop living this hypothetical life in our mind.
So many people are unaware of really what self-defense is, when it can be used, the circumstances when it can be used. It's a lot of factors. People think they just say, oh, well, it's self-defense. You can't claim self-defense on everything. So a channel like yours with a message like yours is good for people to actually get, correct information. And I'm not a lawyer by any means, but I was involved in a shooting. I was facing life in prison, and there's nobody that learns the law quicker than somebody facing a lot of time in jail. So that's my stance from that point.
Yeah. To be clear, you have shot someone in self-defense. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Before we really get into it, how often did you train with your weapon?
I mean, not very often. Like, I'm not prior military, but I've always been what I would say, I don't know what a gun enthusiast entails, but I've always owned guns. Since I was 18 years old, I owned a shotgun. When I was 21 years old, multiple handguns, rifles. I probably had about 6 or 7 guns total. And I would go to the range here and there. I had got my CWP about 2 years prior to this incident. And then I had a Smith & Wesson 9mm that I carried as my carry weapon. It was just smaller. I think I had like a 40 cal at the house. I had a SKS, different guns. Some I'd gotten through, deals, card games, etc. But the 9 was my carry weapon. And I'd actually been pulled over by the police, and the numbers ran on that gun, which later come back to help me, because when I said this was my carry weapon, I've been pulled over with. They were able to actually find that when the serial numbers was ran on that gun, and North Charleston Police Department had pulled me over and ran the numbers, and it kind of backed the story that, hey, this is the weapon he would carry, so that helped. So, I mean, I guess to answer your question, I wasn't every weekend out shooting, but I mean, I knew how to handle a gun. I knew how to use one, and I did have my CWP permit, which you have to take a class for that. There's a shooting portion and a test portion, which I recommend anybody that's going to be carrying a weapon go take. It's very informative. It helps you out, lets you know situations that you can use self-defense in.
It's really good information. Can you walk me through what led to the event happening?
Yeah, so there's podcasts that I've done. If anybody cares to search it, it's out there where I give the super long, detailed, build up. But, I'll give you kind of the abridged version, and we'll get into the actual shooting. So, me and my wife, there was a lot of things that went on, a lot of, really, really big events, and ultimately led to us separating. We changed houses. We were, in the process of getting a divorce. And before the divorce was final, we realized there was a little something still there. Now, she was seeing somebody and I was seeing somebody. This wasn't an affair type situation. It was actually my decision to split. And so she was seeing someone, I was seeing someone. Nobody cheated. Matter of fact, the fact that we were both in relationships kind of was going to help speed along the divorce process, because we had agreed on what we were going to ask for. Because she was seeing someone else, we had agreed that I'm going to use this as adultery. But the only reason I was doing that was because you can speed a divorce faster. You can get a divorce in 90 days that way, instead of having to wait like a year plus. In order to do that, you have to either prove adultery, physical abuse, or drug abuse. And obviously the other two weren't going on, so this worked. And we had already had agreements, what we were going to do, how we were going to split everything. This wasn't going to be a messy fight. But that happened around November, and in December, we didn't really talk, very much.
What year was this?
This was 2017 when the split happened, 2017. So we're closing into December of 2017, and we start to talk about, what we're going to do with the kids. I did have a son and a daughter at those times. This was going to be our first Christmas apart, because the split really kind of happened in August. Then I moved back in my home in the November the 1st, and she moved out. And then here it is, we're flash forwarding to December. And we were kind of talking about what we're going to do with the kids. And, she was kind of asking how I was going. I'm asking how she's doing, kind of like halfway flirting a little bit. You could tell something was still there. There was still a little, an ember was burning, if you will. And, but we didn't really think that was something to take, and roll with it. We were just going to get through Christmas. And I think that kind of maybe ignited some things, meeting with her family, because the gentleman she was seeing didn't come. The girl I was seeing didn't come. And I would say through January and February, we talked more throughout that period of time. Now, her and the gentleman, they were sharing a home together. After, I think, January or February, he moved out and was actually staying in some assisted living apartments in the area because he was a former Vietnam vet. He was in the Army. And I guess fast forward to April, we make the decision that we're going to get back together. But I'm like, all right, if we're going to do this, you got to completely cut loose from your guy. I'm going to cut loose from my girl. And, we're going to tell him we're getting back together and we're going to do this the right way. And as a matter of fact, what we were even going to do was go ahead and go forward with the divorce, get the divorce. And then we're going to date. We're going to kind of start fresh. And, if it looks like, hey, we're going to make this work, we go to the courthouse, get a $40 wedding and roll on. If it looks like, hey, we got love, but we can't make it, then we're both free to go our separate ways. We don't have to start this process all over again. And so that's what we were going to do. And I tell the girl I was seeing, she frankly could have cared less. She was all right, deuces, and she's gone. The gentleman that was with her, that was a different story. So in the process of her telling him, he got upset. This was middle of the day. He got upset and he left. Now, he had a service dog, which he left. So she knew that he wasn't going for good because he wouldn't have left and not come back without taking the dog with him. So at this point, she comes by my house because to kind of break this down, we live probably within 10 minutes from each other. You've got one big community here, and then you've got subdivisions within the community. So I'm like the one towards the front. She's like two behind me. So in the same community, but about a 10-minute drive from our house difference. So she swings by the house, and she tells me, she's like, I told him he was upset. He left, but he didn't take the dog with him. And she was like, I'm just kind of letting you know what's going on. I'm going to get back and make sure you don't mess the house up. So she goes back, and I don't hear anything from her for quite a while. Matter of fact, it's really late by the time I do hear anything from her. And then I hear a message from a neighbor, and he's like, hey, he said, if you ride by my house and you see Liam's car here, he's like, don't stop. The gentleman's name was Liam. And I'm like, all right, well, you got to tell me a little bit more than that. What's going on? And he said, well, he's upset about something. He was in the car with your wife. They come by here. And I'm like, all right, well, I know why he's upset. I kind of had an idea. And he was like, well, I'm just letting you know, if you ride by and you see his car here, like, don't stop. And I'm like, all right, I got you. I don't want to cause any problems at your place. And, I thought that's where he went. Well, about 10 o'clock, my wife finally calls me from my daughter's phone. She had got off from work, and she informs me that he did come back, and then they got into an argument, and he smashed her phone, which is why I was unable to hear from him. Well, he wants her to find me in the neighborhood, to drive around and look for me. Well, I wasn't at my house. I was at somebody else's house in the neighborhood, so they were riding by. They ride by that neighbor's house, and that's how the conversation got started with them two, and he agrees to go there to that guy's house to talk because he can tell he's upset. He said, I could tell my wife was upset, but she's like, he's there. Everything's good. Well, about 12 or 1 o'clock, I got a text message from him, and he's like, hey, man, can me and you talk? He's like, man to man. He's like, I don't want no drama. I don't want no problems. He's like, I just want to ask some questions, and I feel like you'll be honest with me and tell me what I want to know. And I said, yeah. And he's like, if you want to, we can meet at your friend's house, because that guy was more of my friend than he was his. The guy knew the situation and what it was, but I had known that other guy for, a very long time, since I lived in the neighborhood, really. And so when he said that, I felt good. Now, mind you, one thing I want to throw here, and I like to throw this out, I had a real bad car accident in 2015. I had a messed up back from then, and I had just had a procedure done on my back probably like 4 or 5 days before this occurrence. So I'm really not in the best mobile shape. My L4 and L5 and S1 were completely messed up, and they'd done a surgery where they go in and they basically burn off the nerve endings on the spine to alleviate the pain and the pressure, and they eventually reattach over time. But you're walking pretty gingerly for a week or so, before, especially the first time you ever have it done. So I go down there, and basically what he's wanting to know is, was something going on before he found out about it? Was we doing something behind his back? And in the most polite way, I told him, I said, look, man, that's my wife. And I don't really owe you any explanation, to be honest. But no, to answer your question, no. I said, we just decided, here recently we're going to get back together, and it is what it is. People do this all the time. People break up, they get back together, they see other people for a little bit, then they get back together. It's not uncommon. And, you could tell pretty quick that he knew that I wasn't going to take it to a violent level or a shit-talking level. And so, basically it was a weird situation, but it really wound up just being three dudes hanging out in the garage, because after I wasn't going to get him what he was hunting for, he didn't really have anything else to throw at me. He was fishing for a few things, but I wasn't giving it. And two, I didn't want to piss him off and then send him back to the house where my wife and two kids were at, because at that point in time, they were still at their residence. And I'd say about 2 hours goes by, and the guy's ready to shut it down, the guy's whose house we were at. And he's like, I'm going to bed. And he looks at that guy and he said, do you want me to run you home or you want him to run you home? And he said, I'll have him run me home. And so the guy looked at me, he's like, you cool with that? And I'm like, yeah, I'm cool with that. And so we go out, he shuts his garage, we get in my car. Now, mind you, my house from this guy's house is 10 houses, not very far. It was a little chilly that night, so I drove. So I did have my car, but it's not very far. And we get in the car, and he's like, if I go back over there and she's still up, he said, we're probably going to go to arguing. And we're almost laughing at this point. I said, man, I lived with that woman for, 15 years. You ain't telling me nothing I don't know. I know how it is. And he's like, look, I don't really want to go home. He said, you care if we go to your house? And I said, yeah, we can do that. And I didn't even really think, nothing about it, even though the situation was what it was. And I backed up. We went to my house, pulled in the driveway, and we didn't even get out the car. And he starts showing me this bracelet. And he's telling me this story behind it. And he's like, you know why I wear this? And I was like, bro, I don't know anything about you. Like, I don't know nothing. And he starts telling me this story about how he was in the Army and a guy got shot. And, he's trying to do what he could to save him. But the Army said he didn't do the right thing. And he got discharged. And that guy's bracelet, the name was on the bracelet. And, at this point, he starts crying. He's a grown man sitting in my front seat of my car. And I see tears running down his face. And, men were different. We very rarely get vulnerable anyway, and definitely not in front of another dude, and definitely not in front of another dude in this type of situation. And so at this point, man, I'm feeling bad for this cat. I'm like, he's getting the boot. He's obviously got some stuff going on. He was diagnosed with PTSD. I see he's visibly crying. And at that point, any of my reservations were completely down. Now, I will say what I found to be true was he was not actually in combat with this gentleman. He made it seem like he was in combat with him. He was intelligence. He gave the guy bad intel that led the guy to wind up to getting shot, and that's why he got kicked out of the Army. I'm sure it still bothered him, but the story that he painted to me was they're in combat together. In actuality, he's behind a computer somewhere giving the direction. He wasn't clear or he done something wrong, and the result was the gentleman got, shot and killed. So we go into the house, and we're talking back and forth, and we get on the subject of tattoo. We're in there for a good 2 hours, a lot of back and forth conversation. At this point, we left my neighbor's house at 3 a.m. At this point, it's like 5:30 in my house. We get on the subject of tattoos. I pull down my shirt, and you see I got a tattoo here, but I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but there's a scar right here. It's an open heart surgery scar. And he sees that, and he's like, man, what happened there? And I said, I had open heart surgery in 2001. So he grabs my shirt and pulls it up so he can see the full scar. Now, when he did this, he had to see the gun. The gun was on the hip. And look, man, I'm from the South. Like I said, I got my CWP. When we leave, it's car keys, sunglasses, wallet, whatever the case may be, and the gun. That's just part of the outfit. You know what I'm saying? I carried it everywhere. People knew that. And this was nighttime, so obviously sunglasses wasn't on. But you get what I'm saying. It's part of the normal out-the-door routine. Now, in my house, I don't have any bedrooms downstairs. All the bedrooms are upstairs. So when I go to take it off, I take it off, put it on the nightstand, and it goes back out with me the next morning. Well, I never went upstairs, so I never had a chance to take it off. Like, I have an office, living room, kitchen, everything's downstairs. That's where I'm actually doing the podcast at now, his office. Okay. So when he lifts it up, he sees it. He doesn't make a mention of it. He doesn't say anything about it. I don't know how he didn't see it. He didn't even acknowledge it. But there's no way he didn't see it. So he puts my shirt back down and he goes, bro, he's like, under different circumstances, he said, you and I would have probably been really good friends. And I said, you know what? You're probably right. And he grabs me and he kind of bear hugs me a little bit, picks me up, and then puts me back down, which I thought was a little odd, but we'd shared like a drink or two in the kitchen. So I just maybe he was just that type of guy. I don't know. So he's like, where's your bathroom? I point him to the bathroom. And at this point, like I said, we're closing in on 6 a.m. I hadn't checked in with my wife in a while. So I grab my phone real quick, throw her a text, and I'm like, hey, everything's good. We're at my house. Put it back. And I'm standing there. I'm in my kitchen, and I got my back to the stove. Dude comes out of the hallway, and my kitchen's very small. When you come out of the hallway from the bathroom, you're literally almost right there beside my refrigerator. Then you got a little bit of counter space. It curves up. curves again, and you got the stove, comes up, curves again, and you got the sink. It's pretty like a 7-foot span there. It's not very big. I'm standing with my back to the stove. He walks around that corner, comes straight up to me, and I'm like kind of leaning up against it like that. He comes straight up to me with his left hand right up under me like that. And I mean, it was so quick, and I was trying to like get away, but in the way of trying to get away, the only place I could go was back. So I go up, he's pushing me up, and I'm like up on the stove. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And he looks me dead in my eyes. And I swear to you, and I've said this, and people's like, what do you mean? You know, I didn't know gray was an eye color. I don't even know if it is an eye color, but that dude's eyes was gray. It was like there was nothing there. And I didn't see any kind of color other than gray. And I finally like kind of slid and got off the stove back onto the floor. And he looks, like I said, he looked me dead in my eyes and he said, I'm going to fucking kill you. And I told him, I was like, if you don't get the fuck off me, I'm going to shoot you. And I had it on me. And so he's holding me with his hand. I see him coming with his hand. He's swinging and he's coming across, and I kind of lift up and he clips the bottom of my chin just a little bit. He don't hit me flush on the face, but he kind of clips it. So when he does that, his momentum carries him this way and he lets go. And so at that point, I was able to step back. I didn't have but really like a step till I was in my counter in the corner. And I pulled out, and he's already coming back to me, and I pulled out and I shot. Now, it was quick succession. I thought it was twice because we're in a kitchen confined. It's loud as shit. Pow. Yeah. And I thought it was twice. Turns out it was 3 times. All of it was center mass. And he immediately dropped, folded, fell back. And so I'm just like, oh, shit. That's the first time I've ever done anything like that. You know what I'm saying? I've shot, but never, at a person, let alone actually shooting, to defend my life. And so immediately I called 911. You can hear the guy in the background of the 911 call. That's a key thing because, if you call 911 right off the rip, people know you're not really trying to hide much if you're calling them yourself. I'm not trying to move things around. I'm not trying to stage anything, make something look like this or that or the other. In my thinking, in my head, I'm like, look, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm at my house. The dude threatened me, said he was going to kill me, hit me, and I gave him a warning, like, I'm good, And so I'm on the phone with 911. They're telling me what to do. I'm following their orders, and they get there, and they put me in cuffs, and she said, you're not arrested. We're just putting you in here until we can figure out what's going on. About an hour after that, a cop comes to me, and she does read me my rights. She's like, she reads me the whole Miranda. She said, are you going to answer any questions? I said, no, not without a look. Fast forward about another hour. I'm still in the car. We've not left yet. I'm in front of my house. It's daylight now. Everybody's getting up. This was Saturday night, now Sunday morning. People are going to church. They're riding by. They're looking. Golf carts lined up down the, the paved ways. Everybody knows it's my house. Everybody's wanting to see what's going on. Nobody knows what's happening. And
before you continue, at this moment, what happened to the guy?
Well, he's still in the house, and then I see him get transported out and put into the ambulance. Now, at that point, I didn't know if he was dead or alive. But ultimately, he did wind up succumbing to the injuries once he got to the hospital.
And about how long did it take for the police to show up?
For the police to show up, it was about 15 minutes, 12 to 15 minutes. For the ambulance to show up, it was about 25 minutes. I reviewed all the body cam footage, so that's how I kind of know that pretty narrowed down from the time the call came to the time the first officer got there, then how long it took the ambulance to get there, and then they picked him up. You could see that when they picked him up, he was a pretty large cat, size-wise. The blood was just starting to come through the back of his shirt, just a little bit. And inside the home, after everything had settled down, there was literally like a little bit of blood on the hardwood floor, and that was it. No cleanup.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, it sounds so odd.
It is odd, but a lot of that too was the caliber. Like this was a 9mm. These were not hollow point rounds. They were regular full metal jackets. They were what you would use for, target practice or whatever. So I wasn't prepared to go hollow point. You know what I'm saying? This wasn't for an intruder. And so all those things kind of made a difference. His blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit, which we later found out through toxicology reports. So some of that could have played a factor. Everything was center mass. 2 of them were through and throughs. 1 stayed in. And the through and throughs really wound up helping me because one of them hit the refrigerator door, which ricocheted and hit a wall, which really proved where we were standing. They was able to kind of do the lasers from the wall to the refrigerator to back to the corner, which proved where I was standing when I shot. And all that was kind of just mixed in there. Like I said, once they let me out of the car, and after that, they didn't arrest me. I went from, we're just holding you to you're being arrested to now they're saying you're free to go. Is there somewhere you can go while we finish our investigation? And so I go to a neighbor's house around the corner. They come back. That's when they say, all right, you're free to go back. When can you come answer some questions? I said, I ain't coming and answering nothing without a lawyer. And they allowed me to go back to my house. That's when I said the mess really wasn't a whole lot there. And so I go to my lawyers the next day. I give him a statement. And he said,
Can I stop you one more time?
Yeah.
Did the police take your weapon immediately?
Yeah. Well, when I was on the phone with 911, she said, take the clip out and leave the gun on the counter in plain view. So after that happened, I took the clip out. I laid the clip and the handgun on the counter, and they did collect it as part of their evidence that they collected. They took that. Okay. They took my computer for whatever reason. Once they let me in the house, they made me change out all my clothes. They took out all my clothes, my shoes, pants, shirt, all that. But that was the extent of what they took. But they did take the weapon used.
Okay.
And then, like I said, I go to my lawyer, and he's like, we're not going to the police station. He's like, you're going to give me a statement. And he's like, we'll send that, and that should answer their questions. I send it to him. He's like, yeah, your statement answered everything. We're good to go. 2 days later, he calls me and tells me they're filing charges for murder, and I got to turn myself in the next day at 12 o'clock.
And also, did you have a lawyer already, like, in mind, or did you have to find this the day of?
I had the day of, I was using my divorce attorney only because I knew he was a former cop. And so I knew he was familiar with these types of things. So listen, I'm not a criminal. I don't have a criminal attorney on speed dial. I had him. He's a friend of the family, and he was the guy I was using for my divorce attorney that I was referencing earlier. So he kind of knew, my situation, and, I trusted him in that regard. But now once I found out I was being charged with murder, when he called me that, because, he called me, I went Monday to his office. We gave the statement. This was Tuesday. He calls me and he's like, hey, I got some bad news. That's not something you want your lawyer to ever call you and tell you. And I told him, he's like, you got to turn yourself in tomorrow at 12 o'clock. And I'm like, all right, I'll call you back. And so I just started calling everybody that I knew and saying, hey, look, this is what I got going on. Who do I need to call? One name kept coming back, Andy Savage, Andy Savage, Andy Savage. So I called his office. I left a message. Originally, they wanted me to come at like 1 o'clock. I was like, that ain't going to work. I'll be in jail by then. They want me in jail at 12. So they said meet in his office at 7. I met in his office at 7, gave him the rundown. It was $50,000 to take the case. I had my wife and my mom there. They bossed up credit cards, charged the $50,000 right off the rip. He took the case. And this is the stroke that this guy has now. And this is what it really all boils down to as a lawyer, right? Granted, I said we didn't pay cash. Those are credit cards. That was charged. Mm-hmm. So I'm not bossing here. I'm not flossing by that. This was all charged. So we get him. We pay it in full. He makes a phone call. I'm supposed to be in jail the next day, Wednesday, 12 o'clock. He makes a phone call. He said, you ain't got to go in until Sunday. So with a phone call, he got it pushed back. That's what a paid lawyer would do for you over a public defender. So if you got the availability for a paid lawyer, definitely the way to go. At least a good one. Mine was a good one. And so in that time, what we did was put together a bunch of character letters. He put together, a good case of, trying to get me bond. He even told me, he said, sometimes I don't even try to get people bond on a case like this because it's fresh and it's in the media. He said, but with your case, it's different. He said, I feel like we got a good shot at it. So I did have to go turn myself in. Luckily, this is where I caught a break, the circuit court rotates county to county. It was in my county that week. Otherwise, I'd had to sit there until it rotated back around, whenever that would have been. So I caught a break. I got in front of the court, and they gave me bond, and I only had to do 2 days in jail, and I got out, and then it was just, from then on, it was just fighting the case.
The first one thing is, what type of lawyer was he?
He was a criminal lawyer. Andy Savage from Charleston, South Carolina. He's one of the top criminal defense attorneys in the area.
Okay. So after your 2 days in jail, how long did the entire legal process take before you were cleared?
Almost 5 years. It was 4 years and I think like 9 months or something like that. To broad stroke it, I get out. I was fired from my job of 15 years. They fired me. With the firing, the only silver lining to that was I then had access to what was a substantial 401k due to the company that I'd been with for a while. It was a good company. With that, I took and I paid my mom and I paid my wife back to get that debt off of them. I paid the rest of it, what he needed, because that was $50,000 to take the case. He needed another $15,000 to start doing interviews and, collecting evidence and, all this, that, and the other. So I had to basically give up $65,000, 100 and something that I took out. I took out 150, but after the taxes and everything, it was about 100 that I had. Yeah. So 65 to him, pay off a few things that way, because I don't know how long it's going to be before I can find a job. And because I just got fired. And so it was basically looking for employment and then fighting the case. So we had a preliminary hearing. This all happened in April. spring break. So we had a preliminary hearing in June. The judge almost tossed it during the preliminary hearing. She was real close. And she even says, she's like, there's not a lot here. She's like, but given the situation, I'm going to bind it to trial. So, and my lawyer told me that. He's like, don't expect anything crazy. He's like, they'll send it to trial. He's like, but we're not going to trial. He's like, when this happens, what we'll do is we'll file what's called a Duncan hearing or an immunity hearing. And he's like, we're going to file for immunity based on self-defense and the castle law. The castle law, which protects you and your home, job, or vehicle, which in this case falls for me because I'm in my home. And he was like, the caveat to that is, in a trial, if you're going to trial for murder, right, the state has the burden to prove that you, beyond a reasonable doubt, you did this. When you're filing for an immunity hearing based on castle law and self-defense, it's flipped. Your lawyer has the burden to prove that you acted in self-defense, and you only have one shot at that. So if you lose, you're done, then you go to trial. So you got to make sure your ducks are in a row. And so he tells me, he's like, that's the plan. So we start putting those things together. We fly forensics experts in from New York. Every time that happens, that's money. We fly him down, put him in hotels. He's got to come to the house. He hooks up all those lasers that I was talking about, which, when he did that, he came to the house, he hooked up the lasers. We had an investigator that was about the same size as this gentleman. Now, this is the detail these boys got. They had a T-shirt that they put on this dude. The exit wounds were marked with a black marker on the back of the T-shirt. They're trying to put him in position in front of me so when that laser bounces off that refrigerator, it hits that exit point. And we're trying to maneuver him around so we can get a visual of where he was, where I was. And it just ain't lining up. It's off just a little bit. And I'm like, well, duh, he wasn't just standing there. I was like, once he swung and he kind of stumbled over a little bit, I was like, he was already coming back at me, kind of like hunched over, charged. And the guy's like, that's why the entrance wound is higher than the exit wound, because there was a downward trajectory because of the way he was standing. And so he told him, he said, Steve, he said, kind of bend over a little bit, like hunch forward. And when he did that, that dot went right on that damn shirt. And my lawyer looked at me and he said, that's all I need. He said, we good. And so that was what we were going to go with the immunity hearing. Now, this is 2018 when this happened. 2019 rolls around because the court systems are slow. If anybody that's been through the court systems are slow. We're starting to get some traction with this, and what happens? COVID happens. COVID throws a monkey wrench into everything. They asked my lawyer, you want to do it by Zoom? No. You want to do it by Skype? No. I work in a courtroom, not on a computer. So everything gets pushed back. Luckily, I found employment in this time, so I wasn't like, I was okay. I wasn't making what I was making before, but I was okay.
One thing also, because I'm going to forget if I don't ask now,
Yeah.
but what was the firing for? Why did they fire you?
They said they fired me for detrimental conduct due to their off-work policy. And I even told the guy when I'm sitting there, I'm like, bro, I said, I'm in my house. Like, I can see if I'm at a club or a bar or, somewhere I ain't supposed to be. I said, I'm in my own damn house. They didn't. I don't think they wanted the stigma that was going to come with it. You know what I'm saying? The guy works here. He shot somebody. I just don't think they wanted a headache, so they fired me. And to make things worse, they even blocked me from getting unemployment. I had to be on the phone because, like, you can do a virtual hearing or whatever to try to get your unemployment. They had somebody on the phone that played the damn 911 call on the phone and said that people at work were scared of me and they didn't want to work with me. That's why they fired me. And they blocked my damn unemployment. If you believe that shit, 15 years I gave that damn company.
What kind of company? Because I'm
Nucor Steel. I'll say it. Nucor Steel, one of the biggest steel companies in the damn world. Nucor Steel.
That's trash.
Yeah,
God.
trash, straight trash. You got that right.
Yeah, that's why I'm all for stuff like this, like podcasting, where you can at least rely on yourself somewhat.
Yeah, 100%.
That's crazy. Okay, yeah, you were saying.
So I think I was just talking about the whole process, so.
You said you had found employment this time.
Yeah,
so.
I did find employment, so I was rolling with that. COVID kind of put a damper on getting it back into the courtroom. And so then I actually started podcasting. Now, I think everybody started podcasting during COVID, during the pandemic. But mine started growing a little bit of traction, and I had the opportunity to go to New York to interview some people, and I had to ask permission. They gave me permission. Now, mind you, I'm not on an ankle monitor. And I know that's odd to some people when I say that, but I don't know if it was the lawyer that I had or whatever. My bond to get out was $150,000. That was the lowest they could give me for both charges. The murder was $100,000, which was the low end. And then they do possession of weapon during a violent crime, which was $50,000. So the total was $150,000, which I didn't even really understand that. It was my weapon. and,
Yeah.
a legal weapon. But anyway, I had to come up with it was like $12,500 for the bond. We got that together, so I bonded out. But I never had an ankle monitor on, even though I was on house arrest. Conditions of my bond where I was on house arrest, can't go anywhere but, church, lawyer work, doctor,
And this is for the 5 years.
Yeah, this is for the whole 4 years, basically right at 5 years.
Okay.
So that's why I said when the podcast come about and the opportunity to go to New York, I had to run it to the solicitor, and the solicitor okayed it. And so the bondsman, I called them, and like I said, I've never had an ankle monitor with these people. They said, yeah, just let us know where you stay and when you go and when you get back. Very laxed. I'm like, they can't be thinking I'm that, that type of guy to be letting me fly all over the damn place and do all this. But they do. And, about 3 months later, I got to go again. And so we run it by the lawyer again. And he's like, yeah, ask them. We'll see what they say. All they can say is no. So they let me go again. So after the third time, I'm like, look, this is getting to where it could be a reoccurring thing. Traveling, podcasts, growing some wheels. I said, look, man, we closing in on 5 years. Like, we got to do something. And he told me, he said, well, I've been thinking. He said, meanwhile, the solicitor's already been, the one that was originally on the case left. A lady come in. She was there a couple months. She left. Now there's a third one come in. Don't really know much about what's going on. He's having to catch up, And that's what I mean by saying that. I'm not saying he's a dummy. I'm saying he's coming into a bunch of cases he's probably not familiar with. So he's having to get freshened up on all this. The backlog was probably enormous anyway.
And I don't know if you study other people's cases, but almost every single case or person I've interviewed has had the same thing happen. Yeah. It's like never the same detective throughout the whole thing.
Which is good in some cases, but then in some cases it's bad. It just depends on, like I was fortunate enough in my case to where I didn't need to lie. I didn't have to fabricate anything. And so really people that were around from the beginning that knew it, if they had like good things to say about it, that was bad because they were gone and not around. So it really just kind of depends. It's hit and miss, but people move, people get lost, things get lost, people forget, hell, people die sometimes, 5 years, you're talking through COVID, you never know what might happen. And the lawyer comes to me and he tells me, he said, I got an idea, he said, but it's a risk. And he said, I'm thinking about calling this solicitor and say, look, you got this case on your docket. We feel so strong that this case should be dismissed that we're going to show you everything we have. We're going to show you our entire case. And we feel like this shit is going to be so strong that you're going to be like, you know what? Dismiss. And he's like, but he said, the downside to that is if this guy wants to play ball, he now knows everything we have. Mm-hmm. He knows the whole playbook. And he can go back and cater his defense to that. He's like, so it's a risk. He's like, what you want to do? I said, I'm a gambler. Let's go. And so we do it. We get the forensics guy back out here. He puts together a PowerPoint presentation, basically blowing holes in every reason that they have why they thought I'd done this maliciously. So one of the things was they said, well, he said there was a struggle before the shooting, but we see no signs of a struggle. So they take the first arriving officer's body cam footage. As soon as he walks in the kitchen, they zoom in. If you go into the kitchen, there's a knocked over shot glass on the floor, signs of a struggle. They turn to the counter. There's a knocked over, like a glass similar to this. It's not this one, but it's similar to it. It was knocked over on the counter, signs of a struggle. But they, for some reason, didn't ignore that. I guess they thought I had glasses laying all over the damn place like normal. But they wrote in the report, no signs of a struggle. Bullshit. Next phase, they said, well, he was wearing a white shirt. He said he was in close proximity to the guy, but he had no blood spatter on him. Well, he's wearing 3 shirts. He's wearing like a T-shirt, a long sleeve shirt, and then like a Under Armour, like thin hoodie over all those. Everything is center mass. You're not going to get that blood transfer back out. And again, like I said earlier, these were full metal jacket rounds, not hollow points. You're not going to get all that back spatter that you see. It's not like the movies, bro. People think it's like the movies when he's shooting and blood flies everywhere. I never seen blood the whole entire time. The only time I ever seen blood, after the shots fired, the lady on the 911 call told me to go get a towel. I bring it back. I pull up his shirt, and I'm having to look to actually find the entrance wounds because they were so small. And I lay the towel over him. When the 911 operator told me the cop was there, when I got up, I kind of shifted the towel, and you could see a little bit of blood on the towel. That's the only time I ever saw blood. I'd never seen a drop of blood anywhere. So there ain't no blood going to be on me. I said, hell, there wasn't even any blood anywhere on him. Like the towel barely had blood on it. So why is there going to be blood on me? And I think there was one other thing they said. It slips my mind right now, but basically our whole thing was just blowing holes in the reasons why they said they were going to charge me. And so we go to the police station and we show it to them. The solicitor's there. His number one's there. The investigator that done the original investigating is there. Then we leave, and it's like, all right, now they got to show them what they got on me. But I'm not allowed to be in that. But the next step is they're coming to my house. The solicitor, investigator, everybody, they're coming to my home. So I'm like, all right, well, I'll go on home. I'll see y'all there. So my investigator gets there a little bit before everybody else. And so, of course, I'm talking to him. I'm like, all right, what they got? And he's like, dude, nothing. I'm like, what do you mean nothing? He's like, they got nothing. He's like, they got your clothes, your computer, and your gun. And I'm like, so no reason of why they're doing, no smoking gun. No, this is why we're doing this. No, nothing. He's like, no. He's like, they just said, this is what we collected from the crime scene. And they were kind of like waiting for them to say, and this is why we believe this, or this is why this, nothing. And so the guy comes there, the solicitor, his number two, the investigator, and I walk him through, much like the story I'm telling you, exactly how it happened. I'm putting that glass in his hand. I say, here, cuz, hold this. You feel how heavy that is? That ain't a solo cup. You're not just going to knock that over by a wind. You know, it's got to be hit. He sees the refrigerator. I never changed that refrigerator. The handle got hit, the front got hit, and then it ricocheted to the wall. I never covered up the mark on the wall. Damn near everything was just like it was that day, except we did clean the blood up off the floor. Because I had a thought we might have to show some people this refrigerator. It might come into play, so I never got rid of it. And so you could tell he took it in, like he really thought about it, and he was like, okay. And, you know, he asked me a few questions, and then he left. And so it still wasn't like, you know, this is my answer. It took about 3 more months after that. And then finally, this is 2018, this is 2022, end of 2022, October, they finally dropped it. So
was it just considered dismissed at that point?
It's considered dismissed. My lawyer called and told me, he said that they got all the paperwork in, that they were dismissing the charges. My record's been expunged. The only way you can find anything on it, there was some reports after everything happened, so those are still up. And, you know, I thought about doing something to try to bury them, but, you know, if I'm going to go on podcast and tell the story, there's really no need. But the thing is, I'll tell people is, you know, they didn't print jack shit when I got the case dismissed. You know, they printed everything, you know, calling me a killer and calling me this and calling me that and saying I was a menace to the neighborhood and all that. I'd never been in trouble in my life. You know, I never got arrested for anything. You know, and to that regard, because I was on house arrest and because I didn't have a job for a little while, it was crazy. I got murder charges on me, but everybody was sending their kids to my house because they knew I'm home and they knew I couldn't go anywhere. Oh, I'm going to send so-and-so down there to your house because you home, right? Yeah, I'm home. I can't go anywhere. So it was really crazy, but you know, when it all got said and done, man, the ones who stuck by me, you know, they were there, and I lost some people throughout it, unfortunately. But, you know, it is what it is. The truth finally come out. It took 4.5 years, 5 years, and altogether, bond, lawyer fees and everything, about $115,000. But, you know, at the end of the day, it finally got settled. I wish I didn't have to, trust me, there's a lot of things I could do with $115,000 right now. You know, other than pay a lawyer, but you know, you can't put a price on free.
Apparently the courts can though.
Yeah, the courts can. And that's the thing though, man, like I said before, you know, with the paid lawyer, because make no mistake about it, if I'd had a public defender, I'd be in jail. Me and you wouldn't be having this conversation because they can't do all the stuff that a paid lawyer, they can't fly down a forensics expert from New York. They can't go and talk to all these people and run all these tests and get all these things done and get all these papers from everybody else. You know, they got stuff on the guy and, you know, medical records and VA records and things like that. A public defender can't do that. So what they do is they offer you a plea deal. Hey, you know, you're looking at 20, but if you do manslaughter, you know, we might can get it down to 10 or 15 and, you know, you do 8 or 9, you know, you be out and that's how they do. And somebody's looking at 25 to life. 8 or 9 ain't bad. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You know, when you think about it like that, if that's your choices, you know, obviously nobody wants to do anything. But if you found guilty, that's life. You're going to take the 8 or 9 to try to get out. So that's the difference really between the public defenders and the paid lawyers. Because you hear them people all the time say, I got a 98% conviction rate or 99% conviction rate. No, you don't. You got a high plea deal rate because people don't want to go to jail. It saves the courts money when you don't go to court too. You know, so it's a benefit for all of them. They get their conviction. They get their win. The guy's going to go to jail for a whole lot less time than he would if he goes to trial and he's found guilty. And that's really how the system works, man.
Gotcha. Okay. Did you feel like there was any real emotional stress that you had to cope with through all this?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of it. And, you know, oddly enough, it really wasn't from the shooting. And I say that because, like, as soon as the shooting happened, everything else happened that I had to deal with. So, you know, you have the shooting happen on a Sunday morning. On a Tuesday, I found out I'm getting arrested or I got to turn myself in. You know, I get arrested, get bond, get out, I get fired. Now I got to look for a job. Now I got to work on my defense to keep my behind out of jail. So it was just like one domino after the other after the other. And it's an unbelievable amount of stress, man. I told my wife, like, I'm bald now. I had hair when this shit started. You know, I put it like you go into a doctor and you're trying to see if you got terminal cancer. And they said, all right, we'll call you with the results, and you don't hear a phone ring for 5 years. You know, imagine what that would do for you. My wife recently had a scare, and thank God it's positive so I can talk about it. But, you know, she had a skin cancer scare, and she was waiting by that phone for that doctor to call and let her know what was going on. And we're still together, too, by the way. And that's why I said my wife. You know, and I told her, I was like, you know, I said, how nervous you been waiting on that doctor's call? I said, just to give you a glimpse, I said, that's what I felt for 5 years. You know, it's unbearable. You can't even imagine. And it's hard to function. I can see why people would get, you know, addicted to alcohol or some kind of pills or something to help them through. I myself use the podcast, my own podcast, as that addiction. And sometimes my wife tells me it is an addiction because I'll come in from work and I'll go straight on it and start working. You know, it's what I used as an escape from the reality of the situation.
Yeah. And did you receive any, like, professional help from counselors or anything like that?
I seen a counselor for a little bit after it happened, and you know, I'm very pro counselor, but I'll be honest with you, the experience that I had, I'm very like, for me to take advice from you, I've got to know that you've been through something similar to me, and that's just me. For somebody just sitting across from a couch with their legs crossed and reading some generic shit from a book, it don't really do for me what it does for some people. And maybe I'm odd and different, but to me, it didn't really help. And I did it for a little bit, and then I just didn't go back. Believe it or not, where I've found the most, like, you know, solace through all this whole thing is when I tell my story. And most people think that's crazy because, like, man, you're reliving it. I'm like, yeah, but, you know, I'm reliving it how it really went. I'm not relying on Joe Blow across the street to read the newspaper clippings because that shit was wrong. I'm not allowing them to come up with their own. Man, I heard so many stories. I heard he came in and found his wife with a guy and he shot the guy. We ain't lived in the same house in 5 months. Like, people come up with the craziest shit. And I'm like, you know, when I'm telling it the way it really happened. So I'm controlling the narrative. And that became really therapeutic for me to start telling that story. And I couldn't tell it till after it was done, but it became really therapeutic to start telling the story after everything had come to, you know, finalization.
Were some of the news articles, like, way off also, like the story you just gave?
Well, not so much with that, but, I mean, they were way off, you know, just, you know, everything was just murder. And it's not a murder. You know, I told them it was self-defense. And, you know, things are so quickly classified as that way. And people are so quick to just judge you off an article and not know anything about what's going on. And then with social media, dear God, it's worse because people start somebody prints one wrong thing or shares one wrong thing, and everybody picks up on it. I was seeing in the Facebook pages of my community, well, him and his wife were split up. I bet he did it because of this, and it's shared. And I'm seeing people I know commenting on it. Yeah, you probably right. And I'm like, no, you damn well ain't commenting on it. I couldn't say nothing, but I'm just like, boy, I'm keeping receipts. I'm keeping receipts. And I mean, you can't, that's the sad part about it. You can't control all that. When you get thrust into the spotlight like that, it's just something that you can't avoid. You know, people are going to talk. They're going to throw rumors around. And, you know, the thing that really got me was like, you know, everybody had something to print when I got arrested. Nobody printed anything when I got the charges dropped. One paper did contact me, and it was only because my lawyer contacted them and said, hey, if you want a story, this guy just got his charges dismissed. And so they contacted me, and they said they were going to run it whether I talked to them or not. So I said, well, if they're going to run it regardless, at least I'll talk to them and tell them my part. And they run some shit, too, that I still didn't think was great, but it was still at least an effort. But other than that, nobody else ran. No retractions, no nothing. And that's just how it is, man. When that happens, unfortunately, you're subject to scrutiny. And the worst part about it is while it's going on, you can't say shit. Because you fly off the handle on one of these people, then, oh, see, he's got a temper. You know, it's a lot of self-control. A lot of self-control.
Gosh. Okay, so what advice would you give to someone going through a similar experience?
Get a paid lawyer if you can. That's first and foremost, number one, my best advice I can give. Get a paid lawyer if that's, you know, within your means of, to do so. Second of all, I know it's hard, and I didn't do this, and it drove me crazy, so I can give this piece of advice. Get rid of social media. Just turn it off, because you're going to go on it, you're going to check it, you're going to see the articles, you're going to see what people's commenting, you're going to see what people say. It'll consume you. Get rid of social media for the time being, because it'll just eat you up. It'll make you mad. Like I said, the people that I had commenting, some of them I thought were friends, and they're up there commenting, slick shit. And just, have faith, man. Have a good support system. Have faith. And if you did right, if you acted within your right, then, it will work out for you. The unfortunate part about that is, like I said, that's the difference between the paid lawyer and a public defender. A public defender is not always going to be able to point out that. There's a lot of people that's in jail over a situation similar to mine that it's just because they couldn't afford good legal representation. So it's, it's important just to keep faith. Whoever you pray to them. I prayed a lot during my time. And ultimately, it all worked out for me. But I've talked to a lot of people since then on the podcast that, it didn't work out for them. They went to jail for, 15 years, 17 years, 22 years. One guy I interviewed, he did 22 years for a crime he didn't commit. He got it overturned, his conviction overturned. But then it recently got turned back, and as of the 25th of this month, he might have to go back to jail to serve the rest of the 17 years. And they know good and well he wasn't the guy that did it. The main witness that put him to jail said they seen him running away from the crime scene, and this dude had gotten shot in the leg years prior. He can't run. He's unable to run. So they know it's not him, but yet they about to send him back to jail for 17 years. It's ridiculous. So it's just, you got to be careful, man. I even recommend some of those gun insurance things. I didn't have it, but I wish I had it, because those things can help from what I understand. You pay a certain amount of money, and if you're in a situation like this, they'll cover a lot of your legal fees if you're found innocent. Are
there any steps you wish you had taken before or after the incident to better prepare, protect yourself legally and emotionally?
Legally, I think I've done everything the right way legally. Obviously, I didn't foresee any of this happening. I would have never thought that morning when I woke up that the next day I would be, facing life in prison. You see your name on that docket of, versus the state of South Carolina, they wanting to give you life in prison. That's an eye-opener. So I would have never thought that. But I think legally I did it the right way. I always tell people, like, look, and I tell my son this, like, don't talk to a cop. And I'm not disparaging law enforcement, but they get tunnel vision real easy. If you start talking, you can hurt yourself. You do not have to talk to the police. Use your right to remain silent. Take that right until you speak with a lawyer. My case was a little different than most because I didn't have to go talk to the lawyers or didn't have to go talk to the police. I did have a lawyer. Everything was facilitated, even my surrender. So mine was a little different than most, but I just tell you, don't talk to the cops. I think I did everything right the legal way. As far as financially, you can never plan for something like that. And obviously nobody buys a gun thinking that they're going to come to find themselves in this situation. Most people buy it for home protection, and if a burglar or something, you're not going to be into this. This situation was a little different. It had the relationship factor tacked on into it. And I think what the ultimate driving force and what happened was the detective, who was a woman that was recently promoted. And I'm not disparaging women in law enforcement. I'm sure they're great ones. This one was not a great one. She was a horrible one. She actually currently holds the title of school resource officer at an elementary school. So that was her fall from detective to resource officer at elementary school in a 5-year span. So that lets you know what kind of detective she was. She had tunnel vision, and she tried to paint this as like a love triangle type thing, and just put her own spin on it instead of doing the detective work. So that's the kind of things that you got to look out for. And like I said, unfortunately, you can't financially plan, but maybe with those gun insurance things, if you got the extra $20 to spend, you never know when it might come in handy, man.
Has your view on gun ownership changed since the incident?
No, it's stayed the same. I'm a big believer in gun owning. Had I not had a gun on me that night, we're probably not having this conversation. Because I tell people, I never looked at this as I killed somebody. I looked at this as I survived somebody trying to kill me. Because, think about this. If that situation gets reversed and he gets the upper hand on me and he takes me out, what do you think his next stop is? He's going back to that house. My wife's gone. My kids, my son's gone. My daughter's gone. And then he probably takes himself out. So now there's 5 dead people. Or 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, there's 5 dead people instead of just 1. So I looked at it as I survived someone trying to kill me. And that's how I've, always looked at it. I've never looked at it as I killed a guy, and I don't look at that as an honor thing either. I hated the fact that I had to take a life, but, I definitely felt at that moment, it was him or me. And, you know, with him telling me as such, you know, I'm going to fucking kill you. I don't know this man. I got to take him at his word. And there's something else, too, about men. Like, you know, you may text message back and forth with each other. You may even talk a little trash if you're in front. But when you put hands on another man, that's different. That's you know, escalating. Shit gets real when you do that, you know. And, you know, unfortunately, that's what happened. But I've never changed my stance on guns. I'm pro-gun. I always will be pro-gun. And I always say that you would always rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
And also, did you get your firearm back from the police?
I did. So part of my bond was I couldn't have any other firearms either. So when I got out, I had to take all the firearms that I had and take them to my lawyer. And he put them, I don't know where he put them. I don't know if he kept them or put them in the office or whatever. But when he called me and said everything's dropped, he said, you can come up here and get your half Army arsenal that you got in my office. So I go up there and I get all those guns back. And then about, I'd say a month later, he said, you can go to the police department and get everything else back. So they gave me back the clothes, the computer, which is very out of date, and the phone that they broke. There wasn't no saving that either, which was out of date too. And they did give me the firearm that I used back. So I do have it back in my possession.
Cool. And is there anything else you'd like to share about your experience or lessons learned?
I mean, just, you know, be aware of the surroundings. You know, I've learned from this. I thought that I was doing the right thing by trying to de-escalate the situation. Looking back, there's a lot of things that I could have done different. But also, if I'd done it differently, then maybe, you know, if he's dead set on taking me out, maybe he gets me the next day when I'm walking in my car and I ain't paying attention. So, you know, I'm a big believer in everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
It happened the way it did for a reason. Maybe part of that reason is for me to come on shows like this and, you know, share my story and let this know that I feel like my story kind of resonates with people because I'm not a criminal. I didn't lead a life of crime. I was your average blue collar, gun toting, tax paying, you know, living in a middle suburban class neighborhood. The one you would think this wouldn't happen to, and it did. And so that ought to scare the shit out of some people. You know, within your right, you have your gun, your licensed gun. You're a CWP holder. You went through all the right steps. You were in your house. Your life was threatened. The man said he was going to kill you. He put hands on you. He assaulted you. You used deadly force, which you were allowed to do with the castle law, and you still get your ass arrested and having to pay out over $100-something thousand. Just be careful.
And if you want people to follow you, where can they find you?
So the podcast is Crime and Entertainment. So on Instagram, it's Crime, CRIMEN. And then entertainment on YouTube. If you do crime, the and symbol, and entertainment, you'll see us on there. We have interviews with everybody, man. We really cover the gambit. We have former mob guys, drug smugglers, law enforcement, undercover agents, actors, mass shooting survivors, wrongful convictions, people that spent years in prison, wrestlers, porn stars. We cover it all on there. So there's something for everybody on there if you want to go give it a look. You know, we got the TikToks as well. If you go to Instagram, all the links are on there. But we put out at least one show a week, if not more, and been doing it, like I said, since 2020. I think 2022 is when we started. And a lot of people thought once once my case was done that I was going to wrap that up, but I didn't. I love it. I'm going to keep doing it, and we're just going to see where it goes.